I was a state trooper for 25 years, and during that time, I thought I had seen it all. Every kind of crime, accident, or strange occurrence that could happen on the road, I dealt with it. But one night changed that perception forever. It was a night that blurred the lines between the explainable and the chilling unknown. It happened several years ago during a quiet night patrol around 4:30 a.m. For those unfamiliar with the jobs, this is usually the time when the world feels the most silent. Even the busiest highways calm down to a whisper, with only the occasional truck rumbling by. Some of you might remember the show Cops, the reality TV series where cameramen followed officers on duty, capturing real-life police work. I had been lucky enough to be featured on the show a few times. On this particular night, a cameraman named Joe was riding along with me. Joe was a friendly, down-to-earth guy who had seen his fair share of action while filming the series. We exchanged stories during the quiet stretches, thinking this would be just another routine shift. Driving along the interstate, I decided to check out an abandoned gas station near the exit. The spot had a reputation for attracting troubled drug deals, vandals, you name it. Even though it had been closed for years, it was part of my routine to swing by every now and then. Joe perked up at the mention of the gas station, grabbing his camera. As we pulled into the lot, our headlights illuminated the crumbling building. Overgrown weeds snaked through cracks in the pavement, and broken windows gaped like jagged mouths. But what caught our attention was the flicker of a flashlight inside the building. "Looks like we've got company," I muttered, reaching for the cruiser's loudspeaker. "Police! Whoever's inside, come out now." The flashlight immediately clicked off. The sudden darkness made the scene even more unnerving, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Joe started filming, whispering, "This is going to be good." I stepped out of the car, my hand hovering near my holstered gun. With Joe following close behind, I approached the open doorway of the gas station. A foul stench hit me as soon as I crossed the threshold, a sickly sweet odor, like something had been left to rot for days. "Police!" I called out again, shining my flashlight into the shadows. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing broken shelves and scattered debris. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a faint scraping noise echoed from the back of the building, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. The sound sent a chill down my spine. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice steady but firm. Still, there was no response. Cautiously, I moved deeper into the building, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The scraping noise grew louder, leading me to a back room. My beam landed on a shadowy figure crouched in the corner. "Police! Don't move!" I shouted, my heart pounding. As soon as the light touched the figure, it bolted toward a rear exit. I gave chase, bursting through the door into the cool night air. Outside, I found myself at the edge of a dense cornfield. The stalks swayed gently in the breeze, but there was no sign of the intruder. After several tense minutes of searching, I returned to the building, frustrated and on edge. Joe, still filming, met me at the back room, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. On the floor lay a body lifeless, decayed beyond recognition. The sight was horrifying, like something out of a nightmare. The skin was discolored, and the stench was overwhelming. I immediately radioed for backup, my hands trembling as I relayed the situation. By the time other officers arrived, the scene had been secured, but the person responsible for the crime was never caught. The victim couldn't be identified, and to this day, their identity remains a mystery. What Joe recorded that night was deemed too disturbing to air on Cops. The masked ambush at 22, I was fresh out of the academy and eager to prove myself. I'd been assigned to a highway patrol unit, working night shifts from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first few weeks were nerve-wracking, especially since most of my patrols were solo. There's a unique kind of loneliness that comes with driving empty roads under a starless sky, but I eventually grew accustomed to it. One night, around 2 a.m., I was driving along a deserted stretch of highway surrounded by dense forest. The road was eerily quiet. Not a single car had passed in over 10 minutes, which was unusual even for that hour. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a dark sedan parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. The driver's side door was flung open, partially blocking the lane. Something about the scene felt off, but I couldn't ignore it. I radioed in the situation and stopped my cruiser a safe distance behind the vehicle. As I approached, I noticed the engine was still running, and the keys were in the ignition, but the car was empty. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out, scanning the area with my flashlight. At first, there was no response. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the tree line. I turned the beam toward the woods and froze. A man stood there, staring at me. He wore a mask, not a ski mask or anything practical, but something grotesque, like the kind you'd see in a horror movie. The eerie grin painted on the mask made my stomach churn. Before I could process what I was seeing, more figures emerged from the shadows. 3, maybe 4, all wearing similar masks. They carried weapons, baseball bats, knives, and one had what appeared to be a shotgun. My hand instinctively went to my holstered gun. I drew it, shouting, "Drop your weapons, now!" But they didn't move. The standoff felt like an eternity. My heart pounded as I weighed my options. I knew I was outnumbered and outgunned, but retreating wasn't an option either. I took a cautious step back toward my cruiser, keeping my weapon aimed at them. The masked figures didn't follow. They just stood there, watching me with an unnerving stillness. Finally, I reached my car and radioed for immediate backup, my voice shaking as I described the situation. By the time reinforcements arrived, the masked figures had vanished into the woods. The sedan was still there, but a thorough search of the area turned up nothing. That night left me shaken. To this day, I have no idea who those men were or what they wanted. All I know is that I was lucky to make it out alive. I was slowly inching back toward my car, the cool metal of my service weapon trembling in my grip. My arms felt heavy, my breath shallow. The night air was cold, but sweat dripped down the back of my neck. The masked figures in the distance stood motionless, their presence an oppressive weight on my chest. My stomach churned with dread, and I fought the overwhelming urge to vomit. The dim glow of the cruiser's headlights was the only source of light, casting long, eerie shadows along the desolate road. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to get out of there, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to keep my gun trained on them just in case. They didn't move. Not an inch. Their masks were grotesque, with exaggerated features that made them look inhuman. I wanted to shout, demand they identify themselves, but fear had clamped my throat shut. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, unmistakable, coming from the tree line behind me. It was subtle, almost like leaves brushing against each other, but it was enough to send a jolt of panic through my body. I turned my head slightly, still keeping the masked figures in view, and strained my ears. The sound came again, louder this time. Something or someone was moving back there. That was it. I couldn't do this anymore. Breaking every protocol I had ever been trained to follow, I bolted for my car. My boots pounded against the asphalt as I ran, my heart hammering in my chest. The moment I reached the driver's side door, I threw it open, jumped in, and slammed it shut. My hands fumbled to start the engine, my vision blurred with adrenaline-fueled tears. As the engine roared to life, I glanced in my rearview mirror and froze. At least 7 figures now stood on either side of the road, just beyond the tree line. Their masks glowed faintly in the pale moonlight, creating an image so surreal it felt like a nightmare. They didn't chase me. They just stood there, watching. I floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching as the cruiser lurched forward. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I grabbed my radio and called for immediate backup, my voice shaking as I relayed my location and the situation. But I knew the truth. I was far out, in a remote area where backup wouldn't arrive for several minutes. Those minutes felt like an eternity. My mind raced with questions. Who were they? What did they want? And why were they there? When backup finally arrived, a convoy of cruisers with their lights flashing, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly brought me to tears. We returned to the scene, but it was empty. The car that had initially caught my attention was gone. The masked figures had vanished, leaving behind only faint tire tracks on the side of the road. The department took the incident seriously, assigning extra patrols to the area for weeks. But nothing ever came of it. No arrests. No explanations. Just silence. To this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. Would they have attacked me? Would I have uncovered something sinister? Or did I narrowly escape something I was never meant to understand? The Pizza Hut incident, when I was 17, my mom traveled frequently for work. My dad and I often had dinner together during her trips, a small way to make things feel normal in her absence. My dad worked as a police officer, and though his hours were usually manageable, his job often carried an underlying tension that was hard to ignore. One evening, we decided to grab dinner at Pizza Hut. It was around 7 p.m., and we were both starving. The restaurant was quiet, the kind of calm atmosphere you'd expect on a weekday evening. We ordered our usual pepperoni pizza for me, a supreme for him, and settled into an easy rhythm of conversation. For a while, everything felt ordinary. It wasn't until we were driving home that things took a turn. We were on a main road, just a few blocks from our neighborhood, when I noticed my dad had gone quiet. At first, I thought he was tired from his shift, but then I saw it. His eyes, fixed on the rearview mirror, his jaw set in a way that made my stomach knot. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but clipped. "The car behind us. It's been following us since we left the parking lot." I twisted in my seat to look. A blacked-out SUV was trailing us, its headlights glaring against the darkness. My dad turned onto a side street, then another, his movements sharp and deliberate. Each time, the SUV followed. A cold dread settled over me. "Do you think they're—" "I don't know," he cut me off. "But we're not taking chances." The SUV's high beams suddenly switched on, flooding our car with light. My dad's demeanor shifted instantly. He was no longer just my father. He was a police officer, fully in control of the situation. "Grab my phone," he ordered, his voice steady. "It's in my pocket." My hands shook as I fumbled for the phone, nearly dropping it as I pulled it out. "Who do I call?" "The first number," he said. The phone rang twice before a man answered, his voice cheerful. Before he could say anything else, my dad quickly summarized the situation, his words clipped and efficient. There was a pause, followed by the sound of voices and radio static in the background. "Turn into the Tesco car park up ahead," the man instructed. "We've got units en route." The car park was dimly lit and almost empty, its vastness amplifying the tension. My dad swung into the lot, the SUV still close behind. Suddenly, the night exploded with flashing lights and blaring sirens. Police cruisers surrounded the SUV from all sides, their doors flying open as officers poured out. Commands were shouted, and within moments, 3 men were dragged from the vehicle and handcuffed. I sat frozen in my seat, my heart pounding as I watched the scene unfold. The men looked young, maybe in their late 20s, their faces pale under the harsh glare of the cruiser lights. When my dad returned to the car, he was calm but visibly shaken. He started the engine and drove us home in silence. It wasn't until we were safely inside that he told me everything. He explained that he worked on a specialized drug task force, intercepting shipments of illegal substances being moved across the country. His team had dismantled several major operations, costing dangerous people a lot of money. It wasn't uncommon for officers on the team to be targeted as a result. That's why they were following us, he said, his voice heavy. They wanted to send a message. For weeks after that night, I couldn't stop replaying the events in my mind. The fear, the uncertainty, the realization of just how dangerous my dad's job really was. He eventually left the police force a few years later, saying the stress of incidents like that had taken its toll. Looking back, I'm grateful for his quick thinking and the backup that arrived just in time. But the memory of that night still lingers, a stark reminder of how close we came to something far worse.